will not find this recipe in any books or on any websites. This is my own recipe developed when I couldn't find a recipe to give me the result I wanted. So join me to make these nummy, chewy cookies. These cookies are great to batch cook. I'm actually doing a quadruple batch because I've got a few people to give them to. So this is why my ingredients look like they're a lot more than the quantities I'm giving. Okay, so let's go through what you're actually going to need for this. The first thing is golden syrup, 50 grams, just plain golden syrup. The next thing you are going to need is sugar. Now this is just plain sugar, it's not caster sugar, it's actually granulated sugar. You will need 40 grams. And margarine, I just use plain old Stork for this. Again, 50 grams of this. Get those all in a saucepan. Pre-measured out, we have 115 grams of self-raising flour. You do not need an expensive brand. I've just used Master's Own. Then bicarbonate of soda. You will need 1 teaspoon of this. Mix it in with the flour. Give it a good mix. In addition to these, you will need icing sugar. So with the icing sugar, you will need up to 3 tablespoons. May vary a little bit. Now I'm using chocolate chunks with this one. I've chopped up about 200 grams each of white and dark chocolate. You can also use Smarties, M&Ms. I've used Reese's Pieces before. Anything along those lines. You take the margarine, golden syrup and sugar, and over a low heat you stir them until they are all melted and mixed. I do this straight in the saucepan. I don't use a bain-marie or anything like that. As long as you keep an eye on it and don't let it boil, it's absolutely fine. Just keep giving it a stir until it's all mixed. Now yours will melt a lot quicker than mine because I'm doing a quadruple batch. It's going to take mine a little bit longer to melt. Once your 3 ingredients that were in the saucepan are nicely melted, give it a really good stir. Sometimes you can get a little bit of lump of the margarine in there. Now you are going to take the flour and the bicarbonate of soda, pop it in and mix it all together. I'm starting off doing this a spoon at a time. Again, this is because I'm doing this as a batch rather than doing one. If you are just doing it as a single quantity of the recipe, you generally can just pop all the this part of the dry ingredients in and give it a good stir. As you'll see, sometimes the dry ingredients do lump together, so do give it a really good mix. At this point, we're going to pop in our icing sugar. This will just help finish off making it a nice cookie texture. As you can see with the quadruple batch, it kind of got a little bit hard to stir. With a smaller batch, you will find that it will mix a lot easier because at the moment mine's cooled quite a bit, and when you're only doing a single batch, it doesn't quite cool as quick. So it mixes very easily, and the icing sugar just gives it that last little bit of making it the right texture and consistency. Let your mix cool a little bit. So basically your chocolate chunks aren't just going to completely melt, and then we put in our chocolate chunks. Now if you are adding something more like your Smarties or your Reese's Pieces, your best bet is to actually do this once your cookies are on the sheet rather than at this point. It allows you to have a little bit more control as to how many pieces are in each cookie. Now for this, I'm just mixing this in. Now because I have diced the chocolate myself, some of the more powdery bits, I've added those in as well because they actually give the cookie a little bit of a chocolate swirl and the flavour. However, like I said, if you let it cool a little bit first, so your chocolate chunks aren't just completely melting, make sure you do give it a really, really good mix at this point. To have some baking sheets set up, so what I do is I lay out my sheet. I then take something like a teaspoon, and you can use a tablespoon and you can get bigger chunks. I roll the dough in my hands and splot it on the sheets. Now I usually put about 9 cookies per sheet. As you can see, I'm giving them a bit of distance between each cookie. They will spread, so you don't want them too close together because you don't really want them all merging into one. You don't need to wear gloves for this part. I just find that wearing these nitrile gloves, it means that the cookie dough is less likely to stick to my hand. It's also a lot easier if you're then having to, say, open the oven and get stuff out, because you can just whip the glove off and you're not covered in cookie dough. Also, doing it this way means that I can just move the one sheet out of the way once that's full, move on to the next sheet. It really means you can get a bit of a production line going. Once they're ready to go in the oven, I just slide them onto a cookie sheet. And again, this just means that I can have a bit of a production line going. Once I've slid them onto the cookie sheet, I have my oven preheating. You want to preheat it to 180 degrees. I pop my sheets into the oven. Now, I tend to turn mine halfway through, so I set the alarm for 4 minutes. Now, if you're doing bigger cookies, you will need slightly longer period of time for them to be in the oven. So at the end of the 4 minutes, I will take my cookie sheet out, turn it and put it back in. The cookies are ready to come out when they are slightly raised and the colour around the outside has changed to a darker shade of brown. They don't need to have completely changed to a darker shade of brown all over because we want them to be nice and chewy in the middle. Upon removal from the oven, I take my tray and I put it on a cooling rack to allow the cookies to cool. Once they've started to cool, I will then slide the cookie sheet onto the cooling tray, removing the baking tray from underneath. That means I can reuse the baking tray because I actually only have 3 of these, and as you see, I made more than 3 sheets of cookies. At this point, you're almost waiting for your cookies to set. As you can see here, I did have 2 cookies go together, so I'm just separating them slightly, but they're still quite fluid and they're not quite solid. Once your cookies are that slightly more solid, you can actually see here they just slide off. You take them off your baking sheet, put them directly onto the cooling rack. Just be aware that chocolate here, some of the chocolate may stick to your spatula or your gloves or your hands. This is why I'm re-putting the baking sheet underneath so none of the chocolate drips. It's generally not that drippy at this point, but depending on what chocolate you've used, it may just drip onto the counter below. You really can see here just how much the cookies have raised and how the colour is slightly different around the outside to in the middle. This is how they should look when they come out. The cracking is perfectly normal. As you can see, when I'm touching them with the spatula, they are slightly sinking where the air is coming out. This really is just a process of repeat until all your cookies are out. So you're taking them off the sheet, putting them on the cooling rack, letting them cool until they're slightly solid, and then you're going to take them off and put them directly on the cooling rack and allow them to cool. As you can see, they're perfectly okay to the touch. Be careful about letting anybody try and eat them at this point because that chocolate or whatever it is you've added for something sweet, so if you've added Smarties or Reese's Pieces, these are going to be very hot. You don't want people to burn their mouth. I will admit I do actually like bopping the top of the cookies with the spatula because it actually does show you just how much they've risen. They do cool flat. They're not going to cool all fluffy and puffy. They do cool flat. So there's only one more thing to say. Enjoy your cookies. I really hope this has been helpful, and I hope that you've been able to follow along and that you've actually produced some really nummy chewy cookies. Enjoy! I do ask that you do not sell this recipe. If you would like to make a contribution to a local animal rescue or even buy me a coffee, the link will be in the description.